Wait,
Resolve.
hold up. Screech has 1500 attack, doesn't it?
Oh my, are you fucking with me? This card dies to CCV.
The real painful choice was the choice we made to participate in this war crime of a format.
You could have conceded and played Master Duel all night. That I think is the most.
So part of the conceit of the Junior Journey YouTube series is we just accept that Part 1 episodes usually feature some pretty bad games. Because MBT and RJ are applying a rule set to a pool of cards that were never intended to have that rule set, things get pretty wacky. And that's alright, we accept that. But the last couple of Part 2 games have also not been super entertaining, right?
Is it the boy?
Well, he's back.
It's my turn to draw the boy.
And he's gone.
So I guess I'll also draw one card.
Anyway, here's the boy.
Behold, the boy.
Well, here's the boy.
Well,
You attacked into my ultimate obedient fiend.
Oh, here we go.
I'm going to
Sewage.
ignore Cloudian Eye of the Typhoon!
I will continue to not at all reveal what I'm playing.
Got another one.
Ultimate obedient field that we are mere.
Very funny.
Sangha of the Thunder. I get a normal summon
Oh,
Cloudian
yeah,
Eye of
let's
the
go.
Typhoon.
Oh, let's go. I just fucking
next-
love Yu-Gi-Oh.
I'm gonna activate Monster Reborn.
Oh,
Targeting ultimate obedient
let's
fiend.
go.
What?
Now, the 051 was quite entertaining. Or, at least I think so, and the algorithm seems to agree with me. Like, neither of these duelists are running the most optimal version of their respective deck. Scarlet's was, yeah, and Doug dedicated a significant portion of his deck to summoning Twin-Headed Thunder Dragon, a fusion that loses to most normal summons. Even with that in mind, though, these decks still aren't a bad representation of the format. This is just kind of how latter JJ05 was. It was just kind of this chill, wide-open space where all the most problematic cards had been reeled in, and also the choice made in 05 Part 1 to unlimit both Mirror Force and Torrential had a genuine positive impact on the metagame, because suddenly you couldn't just easily win every game by mindlessly throwing a million big dudes at your opponent. Even though neither of these featured decks were chart-toppingly strong builds, they were still interesting and creative and funny, and the subsequent duels were really entertaining to watch. But more recently, the Part 2 games have generally featured two duelists throwing the same broken cards at one another over and over again. And I think the reason for this is that in both 06 and 07, the Part 1 ban list was just not as good as the list produced by 05 Part 1. Scarlet and Dazif had more freedom because they didn't have to deal with any Flame Ogres or Cloudian Eye of the Typhoons, i.e. cards that were obviously overpowered by junior format rule set that were still at 3 copies. Even if some of these problematic cards had just been limited between episodes the way Yamana Dragon and Hino Kagusuchi were in 03 Part 1, that still would clear the way for a lot of other strategies. For better or for worse, the way MBT has chosen to structure Junior Journey means that there's always going to be an element of workshopping inherent to new episodes. That means how good a job RJ and MBT do in Part 1 ban list has a direct impact on how interactive and varied the Part 2 games end up being. If there's a lot of broken garbage left in the format, you can expect it to float to the top. I want to be really clear though, I'm not saying MBT and RJ should feel like shit for missing things. For one thing, it's a big card pool, and for another, the workshop nature of the series means that there's still value to games that are straight up not very good. When we were discussing the ban list in the most recent episode, it occurred to me that the problem posed by the Gate Guardian pieces were most glaringly obvious in Eye of the Typhoon format, where frustrating, unattack overable bunguses rule the day, and those 3 could stand proudly right alongside the most annoying UAOs. But that doesn't mean these cards were really okay before Typhoon format. Seeing them in this context just made it absolutely unquestionable that they were a problem. So when I say MBT and RJ miss cards, it's not even really a criticism of them. At the end of the day, this format is a living, breathing, evolving thing that is hard to nail down and fascinating to watch. I, of course, am a Junior Journey nerd and will be watching all the duels, including the worst ones. And even in those worst ones, I will find something to take away from it that I like. But if your goal is to avoid a game 2 where mostly the same stuff is being played over and over, you have to start by identifying the cards who have that quality from the get-go. So, all of this begs the question, what cards released in 2008 might have that quality? To be honest, I'm kind of hard-pressed to name an OA release that's broken on the same level as some past junior format cards that ate a ban in Part 1, like Crushed Card and Superconductor Tyranno. We were all scared of Dark Armed Dragon leading into this format, and obviously, if you get it onto the field, you can still make very scary things happen, but you gotta set up the graveyard first. And setting up the graveyard isn't super easy when you only have one spell and trap activation per turn. You need to be playing cards that keep you from losing the game before you have 3 darks in your graveyard, and that's not always an easy task, especially if the dads are preemptively clogging your hand. A lot of the cards in the format are kinda like this. Very, very strong, but not in a glaringly obvious way. So my thinking right now is, there are a total of 8 cards released in 08 I would like to see go to 1 copy in junior format. So first of all, as it turns out, the deck to watch out for right now is unquestionably fairies. They now have this towering boss monster in the form of Splendid Venus, which has 2800 attack and decreases all non-fairy monsters' stat line by 500. This card is such a huge punish to every non-fairy deck in the format. It attacks over everything that's not named Majestic Mech. Splendid Venus should definitely go to 1 copy. However, I would argue it is not the most important limit in the format. The most important limit in the format is unquestionably Honest. Yeah, this probably doesn't surprise anyone. Honest has always been a super powerful card, and in this format where everyone's attack stat is so huge, Honest has the same problem as Magic Cylinder before it, where it can just end games by itself. I think this one might eventually need outright banned for that reason, but to start with, under no circumstances should we go into Part 2 playing 3 Honest. It's the single strongest new card in junior format, and she warps the format in her favor. How good is Honest? I'll answer your question with a question. Do you find it weird that normal Summon Thunder Dragon Pass is now a good play? So my previous words about Dad may make it sound like dark decks have no legs in this format, but that's actually not true at all. Darks aren't as good as fairies and generally light-focused decks, but they remain a very strong second place. Yubel is actually one of the most impactful new dark monsters, and I really think the format will open up if you limit him. The thing to remember about Yubel is that he can summon his upgraded version from the hand, deck, or graveyard. So, if you run 3 Yubel while only running 1 copy of Terror Incarnate, and is the other one Unending Nightmare? I need to look that up. Ultimate Nightmare, you pretty much always have access to the Yubel energy to constantly punish your opponent's monster removal. Even Nobleman of Crossout triggers Yubel. It's straight up really fucking hard to get around, and having 3 of these in the format often makes duels run really long and boring as both players stare at him trying to draw their win condition. It's kind of a neat card that, again, I'm not ready to say fully goodbye to yet, but the format will be healthier after you only have to defeat Yubel once. The other dark monster to watch out for right now is Dark Lord Zerato. He lets you discard a Dark 2 Raigeki your opponent's board. You have to be running dark monsters to make it worth it, and he destroys himself at the end of the turn, but still, yeah, he can eat a limit. On the subject of monsters you can just summon and wipe your opponent's board with, I also think Karez the Light Monarch and Red Ogre are good limits. They're more generic than Zerato, but also have specific limitations on how they wipe boards, meaning they should be considered to exist at a very similar power level. Red Ogre reminds me of Storm Shooter in that it's easy to underestimate him because he's sending stuff back to the hand, but if you underestimate him too much he will dome you for your life savings. Karez, meanwhile, is one of the most versatile monsters in the format. You can blow up your opponent's cards, but it's also often good to just pop your own cards and get a couple of draws. Doubly so if you take the time to flip up your blast with chain beforehand. My last 2 limits are not as emphatic as the others, but I still think if you leave these 2 at 3, then a lot of people will play them at 3, and they will be a problem at 3. So, firstly, while Dad isn't as good in this format as it was in the TCG, a preemptive limit would still be perfectly reasonable, because if you have 3 of them in your hand and you meet the requirements, you can still just unload every single one of them, and that's still bullshitty. The final limit I'm suggesting is one of the funniest cards in the format, Arcana Force the World. Don't be too intimidated by that turn skip effect. I haven't seen it resolved a single time since I've been playing this format. You have to get the coin flip, and then you have to plan on tributing 2 monsters. In most scenarios, this effect is actually more harmful than helpful. Everyone's afraid to normal it and give your opponent back a card, so it rarely gets to be as proactive as it would like. But this stat line is a problem. This stat line is a problem when anyone can just get that stat line whenever they want it for free. It may only be the second best face-down defense monster in the format after Yubel, but it's still really, really good to set this monster. So yeah, that's my 08 ban list hot take. My thinking on all of these really is mainly what cards do I think everyone will want to play at 3 copies if they are left at 3 copies. I think some of these cards could definitely still eat a ban after episode 2, but I do think a list like this would open up the format and allow for a lot of experimentation leading into part 2. If you've watched this long, like this video if you're gay.